Welcome parents and welcome counselors. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us for our full hour-long version of our webinar, Beat the High Cost of College. My name is Chris Ordway with the Heifer Group. Heifer for us, hopefully you already know, is an acronym. It stands for the Higher Education Financial Aid Resources Group. And we are just that. We're a resource. Parents, outside of your counseling staff, we always argue they are the best resource you have available to you in the entire country. Now, I'm a little bit biased in saying that, but the reality is, in any market, there's a couple of other companies that do what we do on the college planning service. Most of those companies we see on average charge upwards of $2,500 just to meet with them. Well, we went the other way with that. So again, the reason we think we're the best. Number one, we're a nonprofit company, right? Number two, our entire mission at the Heifer Group is to help make college more affordable for everyone. And we do that working with you individually to help you lower your expected family contribution, what's called your EFC. We help you lower your EFC, inherently then helping you qualify for more grants, more scholarships, more financial aid at every school that you're considering, right? And going the other way as a nonprofit company, our fee is nowhere near $2,500, right? So you get to work with us in order to get the report done, and then going forward, and our entire fee is $95. Upfront, one time, that's it. All right, so take advantage of us there. Counselors, our goal for you is that if you like this information, hopefully you've liked the information you've already seen in our mini counselor workshops, but this is our full version. This is the version that parents see. We present this webinar, Beat the High Cost of College, every single month, sometimes twice a month. And so if you like this information, our goal is that you just share it with your parents, right? So every month we'll send you an email invitation to our new webinar for that month. We ask that you just forward that on to your parents, so if they're interested, they can register for this information as well. All right, so take advantage of us there. Now let me share my screen. Now, I already mentioned that we are a nonprofit company. Our goal at the Heifer Group is to make college more affordable for everyone. Now, ultimately, we are a financial services company, and ultimately, I am a financial advisor. I already mentioned that our college funding fee is subsidized by our larger parent corporation, the financial services part of what we do. So we are able to keep this fee as discounted as possible because we're subsidized. So our goal over the next 10 years, because a lot of parents have at least 2 kids, which means you have to repeat this process again every single year. So you're going to be in this process for at least the next decade or so, and we hold your hand the entire way. So take advantage of us there. But our goal, and why we're able to keep this fee so discounted, is that if we do a good job, our goal is to do a really good job on the college planning side of things. If you need help with anything else in your finances over the next decade or so, give us a shot. We do stuff like 401ks, we roll over 401ks, we help with IRAs and retirement planning. We do mortgages or refinances. All of those things dealing with money, we do those things as well. So if you need help while we're working with you, the college planning service, over that decade, if you need help with anything else, give us a chance. All right, that's how we're able to keep our fees so low. Having said that though, ultimately we are a financial services company. One of the first questions I always get when I'm doing a workshop or presenting at a high school or wherever it might be is, why is a financial advisor here talking to me about college planning? Well, there are 2 main reasons. The first one, hopefully you can figure out for yourself. Excuse me. If you look, I don't care what part of the country you're in, if you look at the total cost of attendance, not just tuition, but total cost of attendance at your local state school, you're going to be somewhere between, let's say, $25,000 and $35,000 total cost for 1 year. For 1 year. That's what we're looking at for the in-state residents now at some of our cheaper schools out there in the country. $25,000 to $35,000. If you're a lucky parent with a student looking at an out-of-state school, you're still looking at, let's say, anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000, maybe $60,000 for 1 year total cost of attendance when you're looking out of state. If you're one of those really lucky parents looking at the smaller private elite schools, the Dukes, the Georgetowns, the Ivy League schools, USCs, Stanfords, schools like that, over $80,000 for 1 year total cost of attendance. Well, that's the first reason we do what we do. This is very expensive. This is likely considered the second largest expense that you're going to face in your lifetime, trying to put your kids through college, right? So this is expensive. You're facing costs for college that no one's ever had to face before. Very expensive. Second reason we do what we do is because people make mistakes with money. And that's not singling anybody out, but the reality is 98% of the population in the United States has never had any personal finance education. Think about that. I have an MBA degree and I didn't have 1 personal finance class all the way through my education. Think about that. If you don't know a lot about how to manage money then, well, it makes sense that you make mistakes with money. The problem is the College Board tells us that 90% of households will be within 10 years of retirement by the time your last student graduates college. Think about that. So if you're in that boat, that means you're working with a much shorter window here and facing costs that no one's ever had to face before. That means if you make a mistake trying to put your kids through college, you're going to end up pushing your retirement back a couple of years or sacrificing how you're living financially for the next decade or so. We don't want to see that happen. So again, we work with all of you individually to do a report that tells you, here's what your EFC is today. If you wouldn't fill out your financial aid forms, here's what your EFC would be without making any changes. Then we show you all the things you can change to bring that EFC down. Do some planning with your finances to bring that EFC down as much as possible and what that new EFC can be. Based on that EFC, you give us a list of every student every college your students are even considering, or schools, parents that you might want to consider, and we show you exactly what types of financial aid packages you'll receive now that we know what your new EFC can be. Because that's what we need to know. What will you pay at that school? Not what they say they cost. What will you actually pay? Those two numbers are very rarely the same. Right? So we need to do some homework first on your EFC to determine what the financial aid package will look like so we can get to that bottom line number of what you'll actually pay. Then we also help you with the FAFSA form and the CSS profile form so you don't make any mistakes on those forms. All right, and again, all of that, it's $95. Take advantage of us there. Okay, so let's get started here. I mentioned a couple of times here, let me forward my screen here. I mentioned EFC. Does anybody know what the EFC is? Take a look at your screen. I'll ask again, does anybody know what the EFC is? Now that's what this says. Your EFC is your expected family contribution. But what does that mean? All right, parents, I want you to start considering your EFC as your insurance deductible for college. All right, you know how deductibles work, right? If you've got a $1,000 deductible, and when you're done watching this webinar, later today, you go out and go get some lunch or whatever it might be, and you crash your car, you might have $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 worth of damage. But with a $1,000 deductible, how much do you pay? $1,000. Someone else pays everything over that. Well, that's this number for college. That's your EFC for college. Your EFC is the minimum amount that you're going to be expected to pay for college for 1 year for your student's college education. All right, so first thing, minimum amount you're expected to pay. Who do you think gets to determine how much you can afford to pay? It's not you, it's not the schools, it's the federal government. The whole financial aid system is a two-step process. First step is the federal government. When you fill out your FAFSA form, it goes into the federal government and they have one job only, calculate your EFC. They get to tell you how much you can afford to pay for college for that 1 year. Well, parents, I guarantee you, whatever you think you can afford, they think it's more. All right, so we have to do some planning around this number just to keep that EFC reasonable. But once that EFC is set, they tell you what your EFC is, but they also tell all of your schools what your EFC is. Well, that's the key. The schools, every school has to assume that you can afford that EFC right off the top because that's what the government's telling them you can afford. It's only everything over that that they can put together a financial aid package to help cover. So some schools cover everything over your EFC. Some schools might cover a small percentage of everything over your EFC, and whatever portion for everything over the EFC that they're not helping with falls back on you, and you're expected to pay that on top of your EFC. So schools are not created equal, right? Remember, that's the second stage of the process. It's the schools who put together the financial aid packages. Schools are not created equal. Some schools have a lot of money. Some schools, not so much. But the key is every school has to assume that you can afford the EFC first, and then they can help with everything over. So we need to do everything we can to bring that EFC down so that you're showing a greater need on paper and every school is able to offer you a better financial aid package. All right. Now, just as an idea, we've been doing this for over 20 years. The highest EFC we've seen to date is $226,000. Think about that. I want to make sure you understand how this works. That means the federal government told this family, you can afford the first $226,000, and then for everything over that, you can get help. That's for 1 year, not all 4 years. That's 1 year. But there's no school that costs anywhere near that yet, which means that meant no aid anywhere for this family. Well, we worked with them. We got that EFC from $226,000 all the way down to $26,000. Huge drop, right? $200,000 just whacked right off that EFC. But if this family was looking at one of their local state schools that cost about $26,000 per year, did we do anything for them? No, right? Remember, we got it right to the point where it would start to matter, but they still assume that family can afford up to the first $26,000. So if the school costs that much, still no aid for them. This family, though, had a student at Notre Dame. Notre Dame at the time was a $56,000 a year school. So when their EFC was $226,000, they didn't get any aid. But now that we got them down to $26,000, they got $30,000 in grants and scholarships the very next year to fill that gap between their EFC and how much the school costs. Because Notre Dame is a 100% school. So they covered everything over the EFC. But understand how that works. All right, again, just a quick recap. If your EFC is 20 grand and you're looking at a school that costs 20 grand, you don't get any aid. But if we can drop your EFC to 5 grand, you could get aid for up to that $15,000 gap. That's considered your need. All right, so that's the important part is we need to do everything we can to bring that EFC down as much as possible. All right, now college is a big deal. Parents, let your students hear this number. All right, the difference in income from a high school graduate to a college graduate now is about $25,000 per year. Per year, they will earn more if they have a college degree versus if they don't. Think about that. Give that number some teeth. I heard this number on the radio about 3 weeks ago here in our Arizona market, but nobody really gives that number some teeth. Think about that. We're talking about working lifetime on average from, let's say, 22, 23 when they graduate college to age 65. That is more than $1 million over their working lifetime at $25,000 per year. But they will earn more if they have a college degree versus if they don't. That's $2,000 per month. Someone is going to be paying them more to do their job if they have a college degree versus if they don't. Think about that. $2 grand a month, that's a difference in a lot of stuff they'll be able to afford. All right, the decisions your students are making today about college, the decisions you're helping them make about college, will impact them for the rest of their lives. When we're talking about $2,000 a month, parents, put yourself in that situation. I don't care how much money you're making right now, but if someone just right now started paying you $2,000 more per month forever going forward, you think that's going to change your lifestyle just a little bit? Yeah, it's a big deal. For the students, it's an investment in the type of life they want for themselves. For the parents, it's an investment in the type of life you want for your students, but it's an expensive investment. We already talked about the cost of state schools, local state schools, all in the $25,000 to $35,000 range. And unfortunately, most students don't graduate in 4 years anymore from big state universities. So there's 125 to 150 grand. If you are looking at these smaller private schools, the Dukes, the Georgetowns, the USCs, the Stanfords, those are the elite schools out there, right? The $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 per year. You will graduate in 4 years because parents make sure that happens, but you're still looking at $250,000. How are you supposed to pay for that? What most people do is a combination of these 4 things, all right? You think about these and tell me if these are a good idea. Number 1, you take on new debt, either new student loans or new parent loans. Number 2 is you refinance your house. Take a line of credit or use your home equity somehow to pay for school. Number 3 is you bleed your savings accounts dry. Or number 4, you dip into your retirement plans. Do any of those sound like a good idea? No, they're terrible. But yet that's what most people do. Most people do a combination of those 4 things. Remember when I said earlier that when parents don't know a lot about how to manage money, they make mistakes with money? Well, when you don't know a lot about how to manage money, you default to what everyone else is doing. Everyone else is doing one of those 4 things. Parents, you know those aren't good ideas, but be honest with yourself. You know you've thought about one of those 4 means of helping to pay for school, right? Remember what I said earlier? When you don't know a lot about how to manage money, you default to what everyone else is doing. You default to what your parents did, parents. But it's a different ballgame now. You're facing costs that no one's ever had to face before. Think about it. What was the cost of attendance when you were looking at college for yourself? Dating yourself a little bit here. For me, I grew up in the Arizona market. I didn't go to one of our state schools in Arizona. I actually went back east to a smaller private school. But the state schools here, when I was looking, were $2,000 a semester. $2 grand a semester. Now they're about $30,000 per year total cost of attendance. It's a different ballgame. I was doing this workshop in California about a year ago. There was a gentleman in the audience who paid $4 a credit hour at UCLA. $4 a credit, that's $12 a class. Now, I don't care what market you're in, community college is probably 6 to 8 times that cost. It's a different ballgame, parents. You cannot afford to do what your parents did and expect to be able to recover without pushing back your retirement or, again, sacrificing how you're living for the next decade, right? Here's the good news. You don't have to go broke to pay for your kids' college education, but you have to do something, parents. Some of you parents think, you know what, 18, kicking them out of the house. They're independent. I don't want to be part of this whole process. Well, more than 20 years ago, you could have just stopped claiming your students on taxes and they would have been independent for financial aid. You can't do that anymore, right? Now you're in this process. They closed that loophole. You're in this process. They're looking at you, right? They're already looking at you. If you're a parent of a senior, you've already filled out your financial aid forms, more likely. If you're a parent of a junior, you're going to do it in about 6 months, but note that they're looking at prior year income numbers. So it's 2 years prior to the year that your student actually starts college is what they're looking at. So they're already looking at you. Your base year for income is the second half of the student's sophomore year to the first half of the student's junior year. That income year is the year that they're looking at to determine your student's eligibility for aid the year they start college. So you're already in the process then. They're already watching you, right? So parents of sophomores, you're likely already starting that process or very close to starting that first base year. They're already watching. If you have a student who's a sophomore, junior, or certainly a senior, they've already been watching you. You're in this process. There are 4 major factors that are going to calculate into your family's EFC. Write these 4 things down. Number 1 is parents' income. Parents' income. Number 2 is students' income. Number 3 is parents' assets. And number 4, student assets. So parents' income, parents' assets, students' income, and students' assets. Now, those are the 4 main factors. Parents, how many of your students have a job? Think about that for a second. And if you are a parent whose student has a job, how many of your students made more than $6,000 last year? I'm assuming none of you, which means they don't care about your students, parents. They're looking at you. Your situation is going to determine the EFC, how much you're expected to pay for school. So we need to do some planning around you to bring down that EFC. Because even if you're a parent who thinks, you know what, I paid my own way through school, he or she's got to do the same thing. I get that. I like that mentality. I did the same thing. But they're looking at you to determine how much your student is going to have to pay. So there is some planning that needs to be done to bring down that EFC. There are literally hundreds of things that you can do to reduce the EFC for your household. And by doing that, you can make it easier for your student to pay his or her own way. Or if you are going to help, you end up paying less. All right, so we have to do some planning around you, parents, to bring that number down. Because there is a lot of money out there if you know what to do to get it. Before I change the screen here, just think about how much money do you think is available in financial aid? In any one year, all sources of money. How much money do you think is out there? In any one year, there's about $140 billion in aid. Seems like a lot of money until you do the math on that. There are 2 to 3 million freshmen, just freshmen, that start college for the first time in any one year. Then you count the sophomores, the juniors, the seniors, full-time, part-time, grad students. Everybody that's eligible for aid, there are more than 15 million students in any one year. So do the math on that. That's about $9,300 per person if that money was distributed equally. Well, that's not even enough to cover half of the total cost of attendance at your local state school, whatever market you're in. Right? So think about that. And your local school, in-state residence, probably some of the cheapest schools in the country, and that's still not even enough to cover half. So the good news for you is that money is not distributed equally. That money is distributed on a first come, first served basis. We like to use the analogy of, let's fill your local high school auditorium with $100 bills. Wait for rush hour and then start everybody in downtown, your local downtown, in rush hour, and say, okay, get to that local high school auditorium as fast as you can. Once you get in there, take as much money as you can carry and you can leave, right? As much as you can carry. Do you think the last person there is going to have any money left? That's this process. So in a first come, first served process, when your FAFSA form becomes available on October 1st of your student's senior year, when do you think we want you to do it? As early as possible after that date. Theoretically, we want all the people that we work with to have their FAFSA completely submitted with no mistakes by the end of October. All right, get it in as soon as possible. Because remember, it's a 2-step process. But when you first complete, when you click submit on your FAFSA, it gets stamped and dated, and now it goes into the federal government. Federal government takes 1 to 2 business days to calculate for you that EFC. They send back to you what's called the student aid report that has your EFC in it. And that's pretty much the time that you know all of your information was just made available to all of the schools that you listed on your form. And now you're in line at the schools. And now you just wait. You'll find out this process is a whole bunch of hurry up and wait. You got to get it done as quickly as possible, get it submitted, and then nothing happens. Most schools don't start putting together financial aid packages. Remember, that's the second part of this process. It's the schools who put together your financial aid packages. And most of them don't start doing that until the spring. But when they start at the front of the line and work their way back. So you want to make sure that you get in that process and hold your place in line as soon as you can. And that's the minute you click submit on the FAFSA. Right? Potentially, even if we need to make some changes, we can go make some changes and get it resubmitted so that you're back in line before the school actually looks at your form and puts together your package. All right, but timing is very, very important. Want to make sure you get in as early as possible with no mistakes. Now, when it comes to types of financial aid, when we really break down all sources of aid out there, you can really break them down into two types. There's free money and there's self-help money. What type of money do you think we're looking for? The free money. Free money is money you don't have to pay back. That's the grants and the scholarships. Self-help money is money you either work off at some point or pay back at some point. And that's the work-study job or loans. All right, you usually pay back with interest. So again, who is it that puts together your financial aid award packages? It's the schools. Remember, the government just calculates the EFC. It's the schools who put together your financial aid award packages. So if you pick a good school, now keep in mind, I'm not your counselor. I'm not talking about your GPA or your test scores or anything like that. I'm simply talking about, I'm a money guy. So when I say a good school, I'm talking about funding, a school that has a lot of funding. So when I say a good school, I mean a school that has a lot of money, a school that can do a much better job helping you pay for your students' college education. If you pick a good school, you're going to get more on the grants and scholarship side. If you pick a school that doesn't have as much money, you're going to get more on the loans and work study side, or even worse, they just put more back on your pocket or on your lap and say, I'm sorry, we can't help you with that. That's unmet need. And that gets added to your EFC and they just put it back in your lap and expect you to pay that difference. So you want to make sure you're looking at least a couple of schools that do a really, really good job helping you pay for your students' college education. All right. Now, scholarships. Parents, I want to take a note here about scholarships. Counselors, don't take this part to heart, because counselors always preach about scholarships. Parents, that's all you hear about. Scholarships, scholarships, scholarships. Keep in mind, parents, they're working with your students. Your students need to know. Don't tell them this part, but your students need to know. They should be going after some scholarships. They should all get something. But parents, what I want you to know, 3% of all aid, that $140 billion bucket of money, 3% is in the form of scholarships. Know that, because a lot of parents have this mentality of, if you don't get a scholarship, you're not going to school, or if you don't get a scholarship, you're not going to that school. Never, never make your college decisions contingent upon whether or not your student gets a scholarship. All right, there's 97% of that big bucket of money still available to help you that is in other forms of money that are not scholarships. All right, so let's go after all of this money. Don't just focus on scholarships. 3% of all aid. Know that. Again, don't tell your students that. What you want to tell your students is what the counselors are telling your students. Students, there's a lot of money out there in scholarship money, right? There are over 5 billion, 3% is over $5 billion in scholarship money that is available in any given year. And it's easy for your students now. They should have no excuses. Every student should get something. They're all small, 50 bucks, 100 bucks, 1,000 bucks. We have one on our website. Simply like us on Facebook and you just entered yourself for a $1,000 scholarship. No essays, no applications, very easy. And there's a lot of stuff like that out there. Check your local employers, parents. Check your local grocery stores. All your local, whatever stores, services, whatever. Anything that you have local, great place to start. But it's easy for your students now. It's easy. Parents, remember what we used to have to do to look for scholarship money? I know some of you have to remember that big giant book in the public library that you had to flip through for hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours, spending on Saturday afternoons for how many Saturdays in a row. And then remember we had to write down everything because we couldn't check the book out. Had to write down everything, where to send the application, what they wanted in the essay, all that fun stuff. Have your students ever been in a public library? Think about it, parents. It's easy for them now. Now your counselors post them on your school websites. Now you have the Navient system, you have College Board, you have bigfuture.org, you have fastweb.com. You have a lot of websites that are basically search engines now that your student maybe can spend 5 to 10 minutes plugging some information in about him or her, and it boils down 11 million different scholarships down to several hundred that are perfect for you, with links to apply right there. You write 3 essays, you can apply to several hundred different scholarships just like that, using those same 3 essays. It's easy for them. So no excuses. They should all put in some work and they should all get something, all right? But parents, don't forget what I said about scholarships for you, all right? Just keep that in your mind. Okay, now when it comes to applying for aid, there are 3 forms that you may complete, 1 form that you will complete, and that's the FAFSA, all right? Hopefully you've heard about FAFSA by now. FAFSA is the king of all of the financial aid forms. Every school out there is going to want a copy of the FAFSA. FAFSA is an acronym. It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. All right, so 3 things I want you to know about the FAFSA. Number 1, what does that first F stand for? Free. Free. It is free. You do this online now. So if you get done with what you think you're completing is the FAFSA online, and it asks for your credit card number, you're on the wrong site. right? Get off of that site. Make sure you get to FAFSA.gov. You can see right on your screen there, FAFSA.gov. You don't want to pay somebody to do a FAFSA. There's some scam sites out there that are charging you 90 bucks or so to do an answer key for the FAFSA. You don't need that. Make sure you get to FAFSA.gov and complete the actual FAFSA. Second thing I want you to know about the FAFSA is it was estimated last year, well, first of all, about 7, 8, 9 years ago or so, the FAFSA went online. Prior to that, it was all paper FAFSAs. Every year when it was paper FAFSA, the federal government estimated that over 90% of FAFSA forms were submitted with errors, with mistakes. Well, now it's done online, so a lot fewer mistakes now, but there's still over half last year. Over half of FAFSAs were submitted with errors, with mistakes. Why is that a problem? Anybody here work for the federal government? Think about it. What do you think a federal government is going to do if they get your form and it's got mistakes? Right? A lot of people think throw it away. They're not going to throw you away, but they're going to put you aside. They're not going to process you. Well, remember we had that big room full of money in your auditorium? Well, let's assume now you were one of the first people to get to that door, but you couldn't go in and take your share of money. They stopped you right at the door and said, please stand aside. You didn't do it right. So now you got to wait. And now you're watching all the other ones, all the people coming behind you that did it correctly, going in and walking out with your money. All right, so the federal government's going to put you aside and they're going to process all of those that did it correctly. Then when they have time, they're going to go back and see if they can fix your mistakes for you. If they can, you get processed. If not, they send it back to you. Well, that's the third thing I want you to know about the FAFSA. You are not going to have a good time completing a FAFSA. All right, so for those parents out there that have already done it the first time you ever do a FAFSA, most parents say 2 to 3 hours to complete a FAFSA the first time. 2 to 3 hours. This is not a fun form to complete. It asks a lot about you. It's basically like doing taxes. And then when you're done, you get it submitted. If yours is one that gets rejected and sent back to you, be honest with yourself now. Are you going to fix it and get it resubmitted right away? No, you're going to put it aside and you don't even know what you did wrong. You're just going to keep thinking, oh man, I got to get back and do that FAFSA again. Maybe a week goes by, maybe 2 weeks go by and you keep thinking about it. And finally, maybe you go back and get it submitted. But again, that entire time of delay, that big room full of money has been depleted. So on time with no mistakes so that you get every penny that you're entitled to. All right. Now, the third thing I want you to know about the FAFSA, or that is the third thing, that you're not going to have a good time. Then when you're done with the FAFSA, every school out there wants the FAFSA, but there's a percentage, let's say 15, 20% of schools out there that want a second form called the CSS profile form. That one is much harder. It's about 3 times harder than the FAFSA. The FAFSA is a bear by itself, but the profile form asks a lot more about you. It asks about your retirement plans. FAFSA doesn't ask about that. It asks about business assets. FAFSA doesn't ask about that. Your primary home equity. FAFSA doesn't ask about that. Non-custodial parent information for a split family, or I said business assets already, or art, or cars, or furniture. All of those things the profile form asks about that the FAFSA does not. So a lot of parents will take one look at that profile form. After you're done with the FAFSA, knowing that that was a bear, you take one look at the profile form and you think, no, thank you, right? Let's just look at the schools that want the FAFSA form. No, parents, I want you looking at least 1 or 2 schools asking for that profile form. Yes, they're asking more about you. Yes, they're digging deeper into what you have going on financially. But why? Why do you think those schools are digging deeper? Because those schools have more money to give you. All right, they just want to make sure you're showing that need on paper, and we can help you do that. We'll make sure you look just as good on the FAFSA as you do on the profile form. So don't rule out those schools because it's a little bit more work. I guarantee you, parents, you will love the financial aid packages out of any school asking for that profile form. They simply have more money. All right, so don't rule those out. Then third, some schools have their own forms that they want you to complete as well, those institutional forms that you see on your screen there. So the key about all these forms is they need to be consistent. A lot of times schools will use those institutional forms to verify the information you've already filed on the FAFSA and or the profile form. You need to make sure your information is consistent. All right, inconsistencies cause delays, and as we already learned, delays cost money in this process. So make sure you file the same information on one form as you do on the other. They all need to be consistent. All right. Now, when it comes to qualifying for Morehead, this is where we specialize. All right. This is how you can get more money out of any school. I don't care what school you're looking at. 3 things you can do. Write these 3 things down. Number 1 thing you can do to get more money out of any school is lower your EFC. Lower the expected family contribution. Number 2 is pick the right schools. Pick the schools that are going to offer your family the best financial aid packages. And number 3 is complete the forms accurately and on time. Now, hopefully you're all experts on that. Your forms become available when? October 1st of your student's senior year. And for timing, we want to do them as soon as possible after that date. So let's talk about number 1. How do we lower the EFC? Well, the entire financial aid system is based on that one equation you see right there at the top of your screen. That is cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution equals your financial aid need. Well, does that equation look familiar to anybody? I'll give you a few seconds on that one. Take a look, parents. I give you a big hint there. What does that look like? That's the tax equation. That is your gross income minus your deductions and exemptions equals your taxable income. Again, we're talking about the federal government here, right? They're not going to work harder than they have to. That's an equation they can already reuse. Let's plug it in somewhere else. That's the tax equation. Well, most families, most parents are looking at this college funding equation for the first time. But most of you have worked with this tax equation since you were 16 years old. So let's do some analysis there to make sure we understand how this works. Gross income. Over 90% of the population in the US are W-2 employees, which means their employers report to the federal government before they even get their money. All right, so as a W-2 employee, do you have any control over your gross income? Think about that for a second. When I'm doing this presentation in front of a live audience, I see people going yes, and I go, I hear them saying yes, and shaking their head no. No, you have very little control over your gross income. There's only one way to control your gross income. A lot of people think maybe it's 401k, deferring HSAs, that's all deferred income. That gets added back into your gross income, and it's the total gross that's used for financial aid purposes. No other things you can think of. The one way you can control your gross income, quit your job. That's it. You have zero control. Can't just say you want to make more money, someone else controls that. Say you get a different job, someone else controls that. The reality is your only control is just quitting your job. I'm not telling you to quit your job, but you have zero control of your gross income. What about, I should ask, if you're self-employed though, if you're self-employed, you get to write off some of your expenses, all of your expenses, I should say, before you pass through your gross income to taxes, which means we've got a few more loopholes now to help lower that EFC even further. Most people don't have that luxury though. So again, as a W-2 employee, no control over your gross income. But can you control your deductions and exemptions? Again, I'll give you a second to think about that. Can you control your deductions and exemptions? Most of you should be saying, yeah. There are a lot of things that you can do to control your deductions and exemptions. You can have more kids, although at this stage, parents generally don't want. If you're watching this webinar, you generally don't want to have more kids now. But so outside of having more kids, you track your mileage, you track your unreimbursed employee expenses, track the money you give to your school or clothes you give to your church or charity. You use accountants to make sure you're taking advantage of every deduction, every possible exemption you can, all to reduce your taxable income. If your taxable income is less, you pay less, right? You get to keep more of your own money in your pocket. Well, it's the same thing with the college funding equation. Can you control the cost of attendance at any given school? No, you can't. I don't care what state you're in, you probably have two state rivals, right? So here in Arizona, we've got Arizona State and University of Arizona. We're in the Phoenix area, which is closer to ASU, the Sun Devils. Tucson's about an hour and a half down south, the Wildcats down there. As a Sun Devil, local patron will say, can I call down to Tucson and say, hey guys, I know you're about $30,000 per year, but you'd be stealing us away from Sun Devil territory if we decide to go to U of A, to University of Arizona. How about we say you do $14,000 for us? Please, right? Say please. That's not going to work. Right? Their cost is set. There is no changing that. It's cost of attendance. We have zero control there. What about EFC though? Can we control the EFC? Yeah. Remember, I've been saying for a few minutes here, there are literally hundreds of things that you can do to bring down this EFC. The goal of the entire process is to lower that EFC as much as possible. And if you look at the equation, inherently, if we're lowering the EFC, what are we increasing? Your need. And every school works off of just the need when putting together your financial aid package. So if we can lower that EFC, we can show a greater need, and every school meets a percentage of that need, which means every school is able to offer you a better financial aid package if we can just bring down that EFC. So how do we do that? Remember earlier, excuse me, I said there are 4 major factors that calculate into your family's EFC. Here's how they're assessed. And parents, we're going to send you a copy of this recorded version, or you're seeing this recorded version. You'll get a copy of this once this webinar is done. So don't worry about trying to write all this stuff down here. You'll have this in e-version. Students' income. Number one hardest hit factor is students' income. Earlier, I asked how many of your students had a job and then asked if they made more than $6,000 for the last year. I didn't pull that number out of a hat. Students' income allowance is right over, just over, we'll say right around $6,000, which means they can earn that much and it's a non-factor. But everything over that is the hardest hit money when calculating the EFC. You get assessed at 50 cents on the dollar for everything over that $6,000 allowance. Know that number, parents, because yes, while your students might not be making that much now, when they start, remember, you have to repeat this process again every single year. So when they're maybe a sophomore in college, working as a bartender or a waiter, helping to pay their way through school, if they earn 10 grand for that year, well, you're $4,000 over that allowance, which means $2,000 is added back to the family's household EFC the very next year. So everything over $6,000, they're working for half price anyway. So while we would never tell a student not to work, parents, we want you to know that number, because maybe when they start approaching $6,000, let them fill out some unpaid internships. Let them see if they can figure out what they want to do with their life a little bit earlier, because they're working for half price anyway. All right. Second biggest factor is parents' income. Parents, you have an income allowance based on, one of the big factors is the age of the oldest parent. Right. The older you are, the better for college planning. All right. The easier the government goes on you because they know you're closer to retirement. So they ding you less. Right? There's a couple of other factors too, the number of students in the household, number of dependents, all of that stuff. But the age of the oldest parent is a big tool in the planning of college planning. So you're going to have an allowance. Right? The older you are, the higher your allowance. You have a parent income allowance. Let's assume they tell you you can earn $60,000, $80,000, $100,000, whatever it's going to be for you. It's only everything over that number that gets assessed. And you get assessed anywhere from, let's say, 11% to around 22%, depending again on those other factors, number of people in the household, dependents, number of the students in college, all that fun stuff. 11 to 22% for everything over your allowance. Third hardest hit factor is students' assets. Students do not have an asset allowance. So anything in their name from $1, doesn't matter what it is, checking accounts, savings accounts, custodial investment accounts, those bonds that grandma's been buying every year on their birthday, anything in the student's name gets assessed from $1. And they get assessed anywhere from 20 to 25%. So again, that's a pretty big hit. We don't want to see any money in junior's name when you file these forms. Fourth biggest factor is parents' assets. Parents, again, you have an asset allowance that the students don't have. You're allowed to have some money before they even start to assess you. And again, based on the age of the oldest parent, so the older you are, the higher your allowance. Whatever amount that you're allowed to have, it's only everything over that gets assessed, and you get assessed at 5.6%. So now that you know this information, basic college planning tools, you do my job now. You do our job. Do you want money in the student's name or the parent's name? Excuse me. Student's name or parent's name? Parents, think about that one for a second. I hope you're all saying parents. It's parents. Two reasons. Number one, you have an allowance, right? You're allowed to have some money before they even start to assess you. Students don't have that. Number two reason is once you do start to get assessed, you're assessed at roughly 5% versus up to 25% for the students. So yes, you want money in the parent's name. Do you want money in the parent's name or grandparent's name? Hopefully you're saying grandparents. Most parents will say grandparents, and the reason is because they're older, right? No, that's not the reason. That's the reason I usually get when I'm at a live event. But no, it's not because they're older. There are 4 major factors. Look at your screen here. 4 major factors that calculate into your family's EFC. Where are grandma and grandpa's income and assets? They're not there. They're outside of your financial aid equation. You will never list grandma's savings account on your FAFSA form. So does it make sense then to move money from, let's say, junior's name where he's getting assessed at 25%, or from the parent's name where you're getting assessed at 5%, over to grandma who's getting assessed at 0? Yeah, if you trust grandma, that becomes a pretty good strategy. I tell you what though, we've been doing this over 20 years. Very few people trust grandma, which is fine. We're not big proponents of gifting money to other people, and especially up in generations like this. Think about what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make you look better on paper so that you can get some assistance in paying for college. Well, some of you with 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, you might be in this process for the next 15 years. Well, if we move money to grandma's name and down the road, she might need some help for long-term care. So she might find herself doing the exact same thing we're trying to do now with making herself look better on paper. The problem, and getting rid of some of her assets. The problem is, for grandma, there's a 5-year look back period, which means anything she had in her name for the previous 5 years, the government would attach to and take. Well, for us, for college planning, there is no look back period. The rule for assets is simply, as of the day that you complete the forms, how much do you have in these accounts? So if, let's say, your form becomes available on October 1st, let's assume you're going to fill it out on October 5th. Well, if you've got $10,000 in junior savings account, go to the bank on the 4th. Get a bank check, remove that money. It can be very easy. It can be that easy. Remove that money because the assessment there would have been, let's say, what, $2,500, the student's assessment on 10 grand. So instead of a $2,500 hit, go get a bank check. Well, first, can you move it to the parent's name? Yeah, you can. And that would hit you at about $560. We'll just get a bank check and remove it completely. And now you're not getting assessed at all. So you go from $2,500 EFC assessment to a $500 EFC assessment to zero. Start thinking about these kind of things. Again, we don't like moving money to other generations, but start thinking about the types of stuff that you can do. In the report that we do for you, remember, we'll tell you exactly where you sit today and all the things that you can change to bring that EFC down as much as possible and have a strategy in place to put it in the right places where it's not going to be assessed, right? But start thinking. I want the wheels turning. It can be very easy or it can be very complicated. It just depends on what you have going on. Here's an easy example of someone changing to EFC. This is a family we worked with probably 15 years ago now. They had one student at a state school here in Arizona. Here's their situation. Dad made $47,000 per year. Mom worked part-time, made $20,000 per year. So on average, they were bringing in just over $4,000 in net take-home pay, right? Let's say lower middle class income right there. Not a ton of money coming in. One daughter up at one of our state schools, their EFC was $13,000. Again, that's the amount they thought they could afford up front. That was what, 3.5 months of income for them, of take-home income? They couldn't afford that. They had made one mistake. Since the day their daughter was born, since she was a little baby, they'd been saving $50 a month. Just $50 a month in one of those custodial investment accounts, those UTMA or UGMA accounts. Well, 18 years later, that account had grown to $20,000. Problem is those accounts are assessed as assets of the student. So that's why their EFC was so much. In this case, this family didn't trust grandma either, so we just simply had to move the money back into the parent's name, and they were under their allowance. So it was a non-factor now, and their EFC dropped to $5,500 the very next year. Think about that. Easy change. Now they could do $5,500. Still took some student loans to make that happen for them, but they couldn't do the $13,000. That just wasn't affordable. Very easy change. Just a matter of understanding the rules of this process. This is a mistake. We talked about some mistakes on the FAFSA. Remember I said earlier, the FAFSA does not ask about your primary residence, the home equity in your primary residence. It does ask about second homes, land, cabin, investment properties, any other property. Well, this is a guy back in 2008. He had never applied for aid before because he just made too much money. And he figured, I made too much, I can't get any aid. That's never a thing, by the way, parents. Don't ever just assume you make too much money. Yes, that's one factor in calculating the EFC, but there are many other factors that we can use to help bring that EFC down. So the only goal is, or the only thing you need to know is, can we bring that EFC below the cost of attendance at your school? If we can, you qualify for aid. So don't ever assume, well, I make 6 figures, it's too much, or I have a paid off house, it's too much. No, we can always do some planning to see if we can bring that EFC down below the cost of attendance at your school. In this case, though, he had never applied for aid because he figured he just made too much money. Well, he got laid off. Remember back in 08, our economy blew up. He got laid off in February of 08, didn't make a lot of money that year, so he figured, I'm going to apply for aid this year. I got to get something. He applied for aid, didn't get any. And then he came to us and said, can you help me figure out what I did wrong? I should have got something. Well, right away, we took a look and said, yeah, we figured it out right away. I said earlier, the FAFSA does not ask about your primary home equity. Well, he, in this case, had a primary house worth $450,000 that he had paid off. He didn't have a loan on. That's a big equity, a big asset right there. And he figured it didn't ask about my primary house, but it asked about other properties. I figured I had to list it there. Well, he listed it there. What did he just tell the federal government? He's got $450,000 to help pay for school, right? Remember, 5.6% they're going to assess that at. That's a $25,000 EFC just like that, without factoring in anything else. So you think the government said, whoa, 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 change that. You made a mistake there. No, they just calculated the EFC, sent it over to his daughter's school. School costs about that much at the time, so he didn't get the aid. We found the mistake, but they wouldn't let him change it for that year. He had to wait until the next year. Well, that was potentially up to about a $17,000 net difference out of his pocket. Huge mistake. Just a matter of not understanding the rules. All right, this gets a little more complicated here. This is important. Little pop quiz in this one here. This family had 2 students at a state school. And I say that because most state schools are just FAFSA schools, not profile schools. In this case, just a FAFSA school. So they had 2 students at a state school. And here's their situation. They had a primary home that was worth about $250,000 that they owed $200,000 on. So they're showing about $50,000 worth of equity there. They had also built a cabin, and they built it over a 6-year time frame when they had the money to do it. So they never took a loan on that cabin. So they were guesstimating the cabin was worth about $450,000. They didn't have a loan on it. So they're showing a lot of equity there. 2 things we need to consider. One, what's the real value of that cabin, right? The federal government doesn't care what the cabin could sell for, doesn't care what it just appraised for, doesn't care what Zillow says. The federal government has a number in mind that they think all of our properties are worth, and it's based on what's called the Housing Index Multiplier Value, which takes into account the year you purchased your home, the purchase price you paid for it, and then the national average rate of appreciation since then. Well, the national average rate of appreciation is just over 2%. Depending on what market you're in, your appreciation could be a lot more than that. Here in the Arizona market, we're consistently between 5 to 8%. California, you see some counties up 12% in the last year. I just read an article last week that Nashville was up 20% in the last year. So again, depending on your market, we could be overvaluing our properties. In this case, yes, the cabin was worth $450,000. Yes, they could sell it for $450,000. Yes, Zillow says $450,000. Yes, their neighbors are selling for $450,000. It's worth $450,000. But the housing index multiplier value for college, for financial aid purposes, that was worth $250,000. Well, we like that better. We're going to go with that. We're going to value this more appropriately for financial aid, which means the cabin is worth $250,000 now. Instantly, there's $200,000 now just gone, right? Equity that is not able to be used to pay for juniors' college education anymore. That is an $11,000 EFC reduction just like that, just valuing the property more appropriately. But take a look at your screen there. What else did we do? We moved the mortgage. We refinanced the cabin, pulled out $200,000 and paid off the primary home. So now here's their situation. They've got a cabin worth $250,000 that they owe $200,000 on. So they're showing $50,000 worth of equity there. That, parents, is a $2,500 EFC now, not a $25,000 EFC. But we created a new problem. Now we're showing a lot of equity in the primary home. We're now paying that house off. We're showing $250,000 worth of equity. Is that a problem? No. Remember, 2 kids at a state school, just the FAFSA school, and the FAFSA doesn't even ask about your primary residence. Had this been a profile school, a USC, Stanford, Duke, Georgetown, any Ivy League school, any of those smaller profile schools or smaller private schools that are asking for the profile form, yes, they would ask about the primary home. So we need to plan a little differently. We couldn't have paid that home off and still make it the EFC look just as good on paper. All right, so again, just a matter of understanding the rules. So the first thing you could do to qualify for more aid is lower that EFC. Second thing, pick the right schools. Let's talk about schools here for a second. When you really break it down, there are major differences between public schools and private schools, but the 3 biggest differences are: number 1, cost; number 2, money, how much money each school has available; and number 3, number of students. So let's talk about cost for a second. Cost: the average public school in this country, including community college, is about $20,000 per year total cost of attendance. Average private, $50,000. 2.5 times the cost, right? So that's number 1. Always number 1 biggest difference, cost. Private schools are more expensive. Second biggest difference is money. Who's got more money, right? Our economy just blew up just a couple of months ago now. Do you think Harvard's struggling? No. You think Stanford is struggling? No. States are struggling right now, right? So think about that. State schools are state schools because they're publicly funded, which means they get the money from the states. And the state gets their money from all of us in taxes. We're all broke, right? There's not a lot of disposable income floating around out there in the general public. So state schools generally don't get all the funding that they need on an annual basis. But where do private schools get their money? Huge endowment funds. Wealthy alumni giving money back to that school because they have that connection with the school. They want to make sure that school does well. Think about that there. They have that connection because of the third biggest difference. They're smaller. Right? In your freshman year algebra class, if you go to a smaller private school, you might have 15, 20, 30 students in your freshman year algebra class, not 400. You're taught by your actual professors. You're able to meet with your professors anytime you want. I went to a smaller private school just outside of New York City. I'm friends to this day with some of my professors from when I was in college. You have that connection with that school. State schools, big 400 people in your freshman year class, you're taught by teachers' assistants. It's very hard to actually get a appointment with your actual professor. Private schools, I can tell you from experience, they start hitting up to buy bricks the minute you walk down the aisle to graduate. They do a good job getting money back out of their alumni. Theoretically, you're making more money coming out of a smaller private school, so you're able to give money back. State schools, general mentality of the alumni that went to a big state university is, they got enough of my money while I was there. I'm not giving more money back now. That's just crazy. Right? Think about that. So again, third biggest difference was size. So private schools, a lot more money, but size, a lot fewer students. State schools, a lot of students, not as much money. Again, here in Arizona, we have Arizona State University. It's one of the largest educational institutions in the country. Over 80,000 students right now walking around their campuses. And their entire endowment fund to date is about $700 million, which seems like a lot, and is a lot if you're looking at a school that has maybe $100 million. But if we compare, let's say, an Arizona State University to a University of Southern California, ASU and USC, both Pac-12, both football powerhouses, people think they're very similar schools. Well, again, at ASU, over 80,000 students, over 13,000 freshmen, just freshmen enrolled last year. And again, $700 million in their endowment fund. USC, about 2,800 freshmen. On average, private schools have about 6 times fewer students than the big state schools. So 2,800 freshmen and $5 billion in their endowment fund. Think about that. Do you think those schools are run differently? Take it up the coast here. Stanford had about 1,800 freshmen and $24 billion in their endowment fund. We talked about Harvard. Harvard over 20 years ago implemented a rule that 3% of their endowment fund has to be used just for financial aid. Well, 3% of $36 billion means that no student will ever pay more than just the EFC going to Harvard. They have that much money. So if we put these pieces together, public schools, a lot of students, not as much money. Private schools, a lot of money, not as many students. Put these pieces together. Let's do some work here. Look at your screen. Remember our equation, cost of attendance minus your EFC equals your financial aid need, right? Well, parents, pick your favorite state school. Whatever state you're in, pick your favorite state school. Have that in your head. Okay, good. Let's assume your favorite state school is about 20 grand because that's our average cost here. Let's also assume that your EFC is $5,000. Who sets your EFC? Federal government. Federal government sets your EFC, and they told your favorite state school, this family can afford $5,000. That leaves a need of $15,000. Well, I know for a fact most state schools meet about 60% of need, which means they're going to give you about 9 grand. That's 60% of 15 grand. They're going to give you about 9 grand. Who gets to pay the other 6? I love when your parents go, I don't know, right? Or it's grandma now because she's got all of your money, right? Parents, it's you. Remember that unmet need I talked about earlier? That falls back in your lap on top of the EFC. So you can see down at the bottom here, you've got a $5,000 EFC that they still assume you can afford up front, plus the $6,000 in unmet need, and up front, they think you can afford $11,000 of that $20,000 cost. Versus the Stanfords of the world, the Dukes, the Georgetowns, the Ivy Leagues, the very good private schools, right? All those schools that cost $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. Parents, all those schools that you might have avoided before because you took one look at that price tag and thought, there's no way we can afford that, right? That's when community college starts to look really good, right? Remember I said earlier, it's not about what the school says they cost. It's about what you pay. And those two numbers are very rarely the same. So in this case, let's take our Stanford up here. We've got a $50,000 cost, average private school cost. Notice your EFC is still 5 grand. Your EFC didn't change because Stanford's more expensive. Who set your EFC? Federal government. They told your favorite state school and Stanford, this family can afford $5,000. Well, that means we have a need of $45,000 now. Parents, when we're done with this webinar, go to the websites. First page of the financial aid section for school websites like Stanford, Duke, Georgetown, all the Ivies, USC, all these schools, all those schools that cost $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. Every single one of those schools says exactly this on their website. We meet 100% of the need of every student admitted. Think about that for a second. We meet 100% of the need of every student admitted. Before sitting through this webinar, you didn't know this information. You might have read that on the website and just kept reading, right? It doesn't mean anything to you. Now you understand this process a little bit better. What does that mean? How much are you going to pay if your student's looking at a 100% school like a Stanford and your EFC is $5,000? $5,000. You pay just your EFC. They cover 100% of the $45,000 need left over, right? That's big. Now, I know there's probably one or two dads out there that think, wait a minute, what if they give you $45,000, but it's all loans, right? Nobody wants that. Now remember, private schools, a lot of money, very few students. On average, their packages reflect that. Their financial aid packages end up being 90-10 the good way. 90% grants and scholarships, 10% loans and work study. Stanford, for a fact, last year was 92.8, right? So of that 45,000 they're going to give to you, we can expect 10%, but 4,500 is going to be in the form of loans or work study. That's self-help aid. But all of the rest of that is grants and scholarships. So in this case, they're giving you a really good package. You end up paying the $5,000 in EFC. They're going to give you $45,000, and of that 45,000, 4,500 will be paid back at some point in the loans in form of loans or work study. So your total cost ends up being about $9,500 to go to a school that costs $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 per year. Versus your state school, they're giving you $9,000, and how they meet that need, they're about 50-50. Grants and scholarships versus loans and work study. So of the 9, 4,500 ends up being in loans as well, and your 11 just went to 15.5. So now you're looking at paying 15.5 true cost to go to a school that costs 20, or 9,500 to go to a school that costs 50, 60, 70, 80. Now, what schools do you want to be looking at? Parents, never make college decisions based on cost. Let's make them based on what you'll pay. And to do that, we need to run that report to get a good idea of what you'll actually pay. Also, parents, we have on, and counselors as well, we have on our website a list of every school in the country that meets at least 80% of need or greater. Now you know what that means, all right? So visit our website to download that. It's on our resources tab in the list of items to have ready for your meeting. It's on that tab. So look for that, because again, then don't print it, I should say. That list is 140 something pages long and 3 schools per page. I always use the schools like the Stanfords, the Dukes, the Georgetowns. These are really hard schools to get into. Your student might not be able to get in to one of those premier institutions in the country, but there are a lot of schools out there that do a really good job. Again, that list, over 140 pages and 3 schools per page. Take a look and see if your students want to consider any of those schools as well. By the time you meet with one of our advisors by phone or video, we need a list of all the schools that your students are even considering. So have them look at that list before that, all right? And counselors, you can also get that list. That's a fantastic resource to have available for you as well. That list is not searchable, so don't print it. Don't print it. It's not in any kind of alphabetical order, but it is searchable, I should say, if you leave it in the PDF. Hit Control F, you can search states, you can search names of school, get an idea of if they do a good job with financial aid. All right, so again, parents, take advantage of us there. Just to recap what it is that we do. If you decide to work with us, again, for the $95 fee, that's a flat fee. A, you get us as a resource, but B, we also do a report for you that tells you what your EFC is right now, all the things you can change. Now you know what I'm talking about. All the things you can change to bring that EFC down as much as possible and what your new EFC can be. Based on that, you give us a list of any schools you even want to consider, and we show you these numbers. So you get a good idea of what you'll actually pay at these schools, not what they say they cost. Then we also help you with the FAFSA and the profile form so that you don't make any mistakes on that. All right. Now what happens logistically is when you schedule an appointment, so you'll get an email once we're done with this webinar, you're going to get an email. It'll have the recorded version, so you get to see this again. You'll have this, but it also has a link to schedule an appointment. All right. So when you schedule that, you pay the $95 at that time. One of our assistants is going to send you that list of schools as well as a list of all the stuff to have ready for your meeting. That is on our website as well, so you can get it there. So make sure to have that prepared. The meeting takes about 45 minutes or so, and then it takes about a week to get your report done. And once that's done, we'll have a second meeting to walk you through all the changes you can potentially make to bring that EFC down. All right, so take advantage of us there. Again, parents, we are one of the best resources you have available to you in the entire country. Again, we're one of the top college planning advisors out there, so take advantage of us there. Counselors, for you, if you like this information, please share it with your parents. Again, we do this exact same workshop every single month, sometimes twice a month, so we will forward you an invitation. When you get that, simply forward it on. I will email you an invitation for the webinar. When you get that, simply forward it on to your parents so that they can join if they want to as well. And counselors, we're a resource for you as well. So if you have any questions ever about the financial aid process, or if you're trying to help a family lower their EFC, feel free to reach out. You can contact us at our website. It's Money for College. That's the number 4, moneyforcollege.org. Visit us there. You can get in touch with us through that site as well to ask any questions. Take advantage of us. Thank you, both parents and counselors, for joining us. And we hope to see you again. Counselors, keep an eye out for our Counselors Mini Workshop. We send those out weekly, so hopefully you're enjoying those as well. And parents, get in touch with us through the website and click the link in your email to schedule an appointment. All right, thanks very much and have a good day. Thank you.